Today we are pleased to welcome Dr. Magnus Egan, Senior Advisor in Research Ethics at Department of Research, Innovation and Library at University of Southeastern Norway. Magnus is a moral philosopher with a PhD from UIT, the Arctic University of Norway, where he examined questions of fairness in merit-based immigration systems. He has given numerous talks and workshops on the ethical use of AI, helping researchers, students, PhDs, postdocs reflect on the criticality of the challenges of how technology shape research, learning, and knowledge production. Generative AI is becoming integrated into all stages of research nowadays, and the research process is being influenced from searching and drafting to coding, translation, data analysis, and various aspects around. While these opportunities are of course, significant and quite helpful for PhDs and postdocs. It's also useful to analyze how it raises some important ethical questions about responsibility, transparency, privacy, bias, fairness, and the role of AI in learning and knowledge creation. In this interactive session, Magnus will explore what responsible use of Gen AI or generative AI means for PhD researchers and how to make sound judgments in the many gray areas where rules and norms are still being defined, still evolving, and a lot of new policies which are being established in place. With this, I'm very happy to invite Magnus to the floor. Magnus, the floor is yours.
Thank you for that introduction. I think I've managed to share my screen now. You can see what I can see. Is that correct? Okay. Yeah, so I'll try to talk to you a little bit today about practical AI ethics in research. And I have a plan for this session, which I'll go through now. So first, I want to talk a little bit about your thoughts of AI and of the ethics of AI. In particular, I'm going to ask you what issues you want to discuss because we have 1 hour today, but there are, as you might be well aware of, myriad of ethical issues one can discuss on this topic. So we'll have a little bit of a vote as well to see what you want to talk about. Then I'll give a little bit of a general intro to AI and research, some background and some of the guidelines that are available now and that are being developed. Then we will jump back into those issues based on what you said you wanted to discuss, some specific ethical challenges. And here we'll try to have a bit of a discussion as well. So you can then interact either via the comments in the chat or just raise your hand, shout out if you want to venture an opinion on one of these topics. And then I'll try to come with some concluding remarks at the end. There's quite a few references in here. So just to let you know, I'll share the presentation and let me know, of course, if there are any issues regarding things you can't see on the slides or if you can't hear me properly. Okay, now I'll see if I can jump over to my Menti here. So now first, I want to get your opinion on AI and research ethics, a little bit about how you use AI in your research and maybe some more ethical issues, what you think about different kinds of use. So we see, okay, it's working as 2 people have joined, 3 people have joined. You can either join by using the QR code or go into menti.com and put in that number there. 8 people. I think we are 29 participants. So let's see if we can get that well over 20 before we begin here. 14. Yeah, getting there. Looking better. 16 joined. Couple more and I'll go over to the next slide. Seem to have stalled. There we go. 17 joined. Excellent. You can continue joining as we go through these questions. So you see the menti.com and the number is there on the right. So just a little easy opener. Have you had training in responsible use of AI? Mostly PhD students, I guess, here. So this would be in part in relation to, for example, PhD courses, but also online courses, webinars, etc. 15 out of 20 responses. Let's see what we have hidden behind here. No is the major one, a little 8, and yes, 4. It'd be interesting to know what kind of courses those 4 are, but we can maybe get back to that a little bit later. But luckily, there are quite a few who haven't had a lot of training on this, so then we'll have some relevant issues to discuss later on. Then a few questions about your use of AI for research. So how often do you use Gen AI for research? Yeah, not privately, but in your research practice, any kind of part of the research process. Guessing this is maybe perhaps of the audience here. Rarely and never is very low. So I guess Norway people use this quite a lot more. So in some other contexts, I've seen rarely and never pop up quite a bit as well, but you're quite frequent and frequent users, yeah. Which Gen AI tools do you use? This can either be institutional solutions, things you've gotten on your own. Typically the large language models. There are 2 that seem to be quite frequent here. I'm guessing that's maybe Claude and GPT, but let's see if we reveal it. Claude and Copilot. Notebook LM, Claude Code, Sict AI, GPT, yeah. A lot of Copilot, a lot of Sict. Though I suppose Copilot and Sict also use like GPT is the LLM that's mostly used in the background there. Kenius, quite a few as well. Quite popular in Norwegian institutions for literature searches. Very interesting. Okay. What do you use it for in research? That might be interesting to know which ethical challenges we should discuss. So what part of the research process do you use it to write, literature search, analyze, write code, etc.? Understanding papers, yeah. Simple generation, translation, finding synonyms, copywriting. Yeah, shortening text, a lot of writing. A lot of use for writing, some use for coding as well. Summaries. That's probably, is that to write summaries or to get summaries of papers to consider whether or not reading them, I suppose? Skim discussion, yeah. So to get overviews of literature seems to be quite a common use. Discussion and news sources, yeah. So quite common uses here, I think. Here I'll move on to another question. Why do you use AI for research? It's easy to say what you use it for, but why do you use it when you're researching? Save time and poor grammar skills. That's one of the most positive, I suppose, ethical uses of AI that pops up early in the adoption of these LLMs in the last couple of years, is that it makes the writing of academic writing more equitable via making it easier for people to write English as well. Save time, efficiency, augmenting, improving capabilities. That's more of a broader use. Grammar, effective reading, some feeling of not working alone. I think a lot of people can relate to that as well. Having somebody to always ask questions while working as well is very useful. Faster, saves time. Now, I don't think I have that question here. But one interesting thing is that this thing about saving time and efficiency is quite a common response. What I sometimes like to ask it then is, what do you use that time on that you save? Is it to read more? Is it to code more, write more? Or is it because, publish and perish culture puts so much time constraints on research? Translating. Okay, so lots of writing. This might have an influence on what you want to discuss when it comes to ethical issues later. Now, this could be interesting to see. How sure are you that your use of AI is ethical? Broadly conceived. Are you certain? Are you quite confident? Not sure, and not at all? Yep. Quite a few are not quite sure, but quite a lot are. A couple of you are very certain. So we can rely on you in the ethical discussions later in this talk. Quite a few are quite confident, and some are not sure or don't think it's ethical at all. That'd be interesting to discuss when it comes to what kind of issues that is related to. So then just to get a temperature of what you think is okay to use AI for and what you don't think AI is okay to use for. Do you think it's okay to use AI to write papers? I've hidden the responses here just so we don't get like the first responses have a tendency somehow to influence the responses that come later. But here we'll get a bit more of a neutral view. Okay. Of course, only if you report the use, not sure, and never. Only if you report the use is the most common. I suppose it depends here on what does one mean by using AI to write papers. How involved is it in the process or not? We can get back to that a little bit later. Do you think it's okay to use AI to edit papers? Same possible answers here. Of course, only if you report the use, not sure, and never. Okay, we have 15 responses so far, 16, 17. Let's see. More or less the same answers here. I would have thought this was maybe one more on, of course, maybe was it? Let's see. Yeah, one more, but more or less the same. So most also think that you need to report the use of using AI to edit papers. Here, I suppose it means this question about what does one mean by editing papers as well. Quite a lot are not sure, and a few say never. So hopefully some of you will be a bit more certain about this by the end of this talk. How about using AI for peer review? Do you think it's okay to use AI for peer review? Of course, only if you report the use, not sure, never. Questions are coming in quicker. So only one more slide of this and then we'll jump back into the presentation, I think. But let's see. Here there are a lot more saying never, okay, to use AI for peer review. One person is still certain that this is okay use. Only if you report the use is 2, not sure 9. So I think this tracks quite well with what's in guidelines and what is in the guidelines both from journals and in general guidelines here. There is a lot more warnings and a lot more journals are more strict about using AI in the peer review process than, for example, when it comes to basic editing. So it's good to see that you map on in general to the research community here. Okay, now I have 7 prepared issues I'll discuss. First, I'll give a general introduction about AI and ethics in research, some of the guidelines that exist, etc. But after that, I have these 7 prepared topics. We probably have time for about 2 or 3. So these are transparency and documentation of AI use, effects on learning and academic skills, bias and fairness, environmental impact of AI, privacy and confidentiality, sycophancy, manipulation and knowledge production, and AI and misconduct. Of course, you can get all these slides afterwards, so you can read up on what we don't have time to go through. There's quite a few references in there on these topics as well. But here you have 3 votes each, and based on your votes, we will do the topics in that order. So we'll see how many we have time for, but we'll start with the one that gets the most votes. So 18 out of 24, see 19, let one more person vote, and then we'll see where we are. Might feel you have enough power there. Okay, let's see. Okay, sycophancy on top. Then effects on learning and skills. Then bias. Then transparency. And then privacy. Great, thank you for your answers. Oh, transparency just shot up. Somebody had a late vote there. So transparency is now equal with bias. So if nobody else has a late vote to throw in, we will do it in that order. Thank you for your participation there. Okay, so jumping back into the presentation, I'll just say a little bit of general, firstly now about AI and research. I might go a little bit quickly over those parts as most of you have quite a lot of experience here, but I'll say a little bit more about what guidelines exist because I mean, if you forget everything else that I say, then you can always go back there and have a look at what's in the guidelines about a lot of these issues. Okay, a couple of words on AI. I'm not going to define it because there's no philosophical agreement on how to define intelligence, so I won't try that here. And there's no agreement on what constitutes artificial intelligence. I also think that we broadly know what we're speaking about here. I think also this is a quotation from Mary Beard, well, it's in a book on confronting the classics, but I think it says something about the definitions we use as well. So definitions are often false friends. The smartest and most appealing tend to exclude too much. The most judicious and broadest are so judicious as to be unhelpfully dull. I think that sometimes applies to when we try to define terms too closely as well here. So generally, we'll focus on generative AI and large language models. I mean, looking at what you use as tools and what you use it for, these are the most relevant things to discuss. Just a couple of words of caution. I mean, we have a tendency to anthropomorphize a lot of artificial intelligence talk. So in the same way that robots often get human faces in order to look more human in the way we influence the way we interact with them, the faces have a tendency to vary quite a lot. This also happens when we talk about large language models. So we talk about intelligence, we talk about knowledge they have, we talk about understanding, learning, hallucinations. I think hallucinations is maybe one of the worst. They're wrong about stuff, but I'm not sure they hallucinate. Agents and assistants. So just sometimes I think the way we talk about some of these large language models influences the way we understand how they work and also how we interact with them. So I think it's important sometimes to be a little bit wary about how we understand these terms. So I'm not going to go into the technical stuff around AI. You probably know a lot more about that, some of you than me, but I like to use three metaphors when talking about generative AI and research. And these are the probability parrots. You might know the term stochastic parrot from an article from Emily Bender, 2021. So use this term often just to illustrate that it is kind of like a calculator calculating words in a sentence. It's mostly estimating probability for words. There's no real understanding or knowledge going on behind here. Though I think that parrot there looks quite knowledgeable, but that's a different issue. AI mirror, I like also as a term. So this is from Shannon Valor. She's a philosopher of technology. And she's written about how the AI mirror kind of reflects history back at us because there's lots of a selection of historical sources that's thrown into something that learns pattern based on that. But often as humans, we're trying to transcend history, try and learn new understanding, new interpretations of things. But as she also emphasizes, I mean, mirrors impact us. So the way we view ourselves in a mirror impacts how we feel about ourselves, how we think about ourselves, and our understanding of ourselves. And the same applies to these large language models if you view them as kind of an AI mirror. In addition, I think bullshit machine can be quite quite a good description of a lot of large language models. I'm not saying that it's all bullshit, more like that it's a technical term from what Harry Frankfurt has written about when it comes to distinguishing between bullshitting and lying within epistemology, so philosophy of knowledge, where if you lie, you know the truth and deliberately mislead, but bullshitting is just saying stuff in order to convince people. And that's kind of a lot of what's going on based on how some of these models are trained. So often they will be right. And for example, the hallucination rates have gone down quite a bit with the, especially the new versions of some of the big large language models that have become a little bit more agentic. But the point is that they don't concern themselves as such with truth. More, they try to convince and they try to find patterns and understandings. So AI in research, here's a AI illustration of how AI in research is going down below there on the left-hand corner. I'm not sure you recognize yourself in that image, but maybe those of you who do work with AI on a daily basis do. But as you see as well on the right, that's like a typical illustration of the research process and how the research process goes. And as you can see from these steps, we could add on an AI on all of those steps, because AI is used now throughout the research process. And in addition to those general tools you showed, there were some people mentioned specific tools, for example, Genius for finding literature. There are lots of specific tools that go along this entire research process now as well. A couple of words about hype, because I think particularly now, this is a good book on what artificial intelligence can do, what it can't, and how to tell the difference. It has a few good sections on AI hype in general. I think AI hype can be important to think about now as some of these biggest companies are going public. So if you look at the news stories these days, there seems to be even more hype than maybe we're used to over the last couple of years. And I think that has a direct correlation to some of these people can become a lot richer if those companies have a higher evaluation when they go public. So there's lots of rapid development, financial interests, and hype going on. You'll also see quite a lot of uncritical stories about AI, sometimes maybe based on those journalists needing access to these technology companies in order to get access to models earlier. There's a lot of mythologizing about AI, so some of the words we heard about earlier. And a great deal of the research on AI does not seem to be able to be reproduced. I mean, that some of that has to do with how AI works inherently in the kind of black box models that some are working with. But there is also less of transparency about methods and openness about data. I'm not sure that's right, but I've seen it written someplace that has to do with the commercial interests becoming so large that AI research used to be a lot more open, but now there's less openness because of the commercial stakes involved. And of course, some of these hype news stories, you'll see some benchmarks that are often gained. So they're evaluated according to a certain metric, and then they build the model in order to beat that metric. So just be a little bit wary sometimes. I think there's also quite a lot of approval and opposition in academia. So some people think we'll merge into some kind of enlightened future, while other people are quite a lot more scared about AI looking over our shoulder and influencing to a larger and larger degree what kind of knowledge is being produced. I have a little slide about Gen AI and qualitative research, where some of these opposing viewpoints on arguments against using it and arguments for using it. But I think given the topics you want to discuss and that they were quite evenly, I think I'll jump over this and go through some of the guidelines. But as I said, you'll get these slides so you can have a look at them in detail later. Okay, so research ethical norms and ethical AI. A good thing here is that most documents I've seen, or close to all the documents I've seen on research ethics norms and how to apply that to ethical AI, kind of agree that we don't need any new norms. What we need is how do we use these norms when it comes to AI. So a lot of you might know of the European Code of Conduct for Research Integrity, for example, or the Ethics by Design framework, And of course, there are more specific things, general things when it comes to the ethics of artificial intelligence. Those are two of the key ones on the right. In Norway as well, we have, of course, the Norwegian National Research Ethics Committees. You can find them on forskningsetikk.no that have subject-specific guidelines. So when we're talking about research ethics norms and best practices when the use of AI, we're usually talking about applying either national or international research ethics norms and how they can be applied to new contexts. There are also some guidelines that go more specifically into that. So this one is the most well-known, I think, the Living Guidelines on the Responsible Use of Generative AI in Research from the European Commission. This is the third version. It was updated a few weeks ago. So I'll say a little bit about what's in that and what's in the new changes. If you haven't read it, take a look at it. It is 2.5 pages, 3 pages, I think, the recommendations to researchers. So it should be a pretty easy read. And it's the one that's I often see most often referred to in national guidelines as well. In addition, I think this one is pretty good. This is from the UK Research Integrity Office, Embracing AI with Integrity, Practical Guide for Researchers. You have this one from a German Wissenschaftsombud, Ombud for Science. That's a FAQ. So you have different ways they've approached this in the different countries when it comes to guidelines related to responsible use of generative AI. Here is the new draft for the new Finnish recommendations from the research ethics committees there. Still a draft. I think the final version will come out quite soon, but I thought that's quite useful as well. There are also developments within the Norwegian research ethics committees where they are publishing some more guidelines and an anthology, I think, which should come over the summer sometimes in the autumn. They have quite a useful newsletter as well, which you can sign up to also on forskningsetikk.no. A little bit more on these living guidelines, as they're the most often used. So as I mentioned, they base themselves on key research ethical principles. So they don't, figure out something new, but it's basically the basic ethics norms of science like reliability, honesty, respect, and accountability. So one has to be honest and truthful, one has to respect research participants, and one has to be accountable to the results in research. And it has recommendations for researchers, for research organizations, and for research funders. Yes, so for researchers, I think those are on page 6 and 7. That might be in the second version, but it's around there in the report. So there are 6 recommendations that the researcher remains ultimately responsible for output. You can't blame AI for making a mistake. You're responsible, you need to check it. Use AI transparently. We have transparency on list 3 or 4 of the topics you chose, so we can speak a little bit more maybe about what that actually means. Pay attention to privacy, copyright, etc. Think about what you throw into the different tools. Do you have the copyright permission to upload this article into NotebookLM, for example, or into GPT? Do you have the agreement from your research participant to upload this transcript from the interview into one of these models? Things like that. Respect laws for AI use. Mostly that's in reference to the AI Act, which will hopefully be introduced later this year. It's currently some lobbying, might be some changes there, but that applies mostly to high-risk uses where you might be impacted. If you're developing tools for particular areas which could have significant impacts on individuals, like let's say you're developing a health app or something like that. But it also applies to, for example, using AI to assess student essays and mark exams, because that could have a significant impact on somebody's life. But if you're into those kinds of use areas, maybe have an extra eye on what's coming in these laws. It has a recommendation to continuously learn how to use these tools, and I think the last one is quite interesting. Refrain from using AI in activities that could impact other researchers. There are some specifications of what is okay use and what isn't okay use there as well. So those of you who think it's sure you can use AI to peer review, have a particular look at that recommendation, because I think also in most journal guidelines, there's a recommendation not to use it for that kind of practice. Yeah. Let's see. So some of the updates in the third version. There's been a little bit more focus on the responsibility we have all as AI users to assess the links used to third-party AI tools. So you're getting a lot of AI add-ons or transcriptions. Here we have a recording, what's happening to that data, where's it going, etc. So things about informing participants, informing people about the security implications and confidentiality implications of using AI for different kinds of things, because we've seen AI being used in a lot more kinds of things in research. And now as you get more add-ons and more programs, there's a little bit more awareness needed on what you're giving AI tools access to. There's also a little bit about these hidden prompts. This is particularly relevant for research funders. So, the typical example is you submit a proposal and there are some white letters in there which the reviewer can't read, but which, if the funders use AI to either, pre-screen or sort the applications, they can have a significant impact on the evaluations made. In addition, there is a new footnote related to substantial use and peer review. As we might not get back to transparency, I'll just mention briefly, because a lot of you said you use AI for writing. So when it comes to documentation of AI use when writing documents, when writing articles, the living guidelines distinguish between substantial use and basic editorial support tool use. So if you're using it as a basic editor, like a grammar checker, or to suggest changes to maybe structure, things like that, and then you assess, judge, consider, and make those changes yourself, then that will often be maybe a basic editorial support tool. That would count as that. Where if you use it as a more substantial use, you use it to rephrase, translate, etc., or you use it to rewrite parts of your manuscript, then that will often be above the bar, and then one would be recommended to report that use. Of course, always check journal guidelines. Now, when it comes to peer review here, we can see that the living guidelines have a new footnote there where it says, using generative AI to search background info for review, using it to better understand punctually some ideas or concepts is not substantial use, while delegating the evaluation or the assessment of the paper, drafting peer review report, helping to understand main elements of a paper, or evaluating a funding proposal is substantial use. So maybe, learning some of the stuff that's in the paper, checking it, maybe that's not substantial use. But if you can't use it to write a draft or help understand main elements, because peer review is meant to be done by an expert who has knowledge about this topic as well. I'd recommend having a look at these guidelines, as they're pretty good. In addition, you have this Embracing AI with Integrity from the UK Research Integrity Office, which I also think is pretty decent. One of the things I like about that is that you're asked, when you start using AI, to consider what the tangible benefits are for using AI in this process when you consider whether or not using it for different things. So you should also think about that in advance, not just get thrown into it. Okay, these are some of the questions you find in that guide. In addition, of course, there are a myriad of academic articles published on this topic. I think these are some of the good ones that come out in the last couple of years. Resnick and Hosseini wrote an article entitled "The Ethics of Using Artificial Intelligence in Scientific Research. New Guidance Needed for a New Tool," summarize a lot of the issues involved. And this is the core principles of responsible generative AI use in research by a bunch of authors that you can see there on the right. You'll also find now quite a lot of specific literature within specific fields as well. Some fields will have had this for a lot longer, of course, computer science or medical research. There'll be a lot of generative stuff on AI in general and ethics of AI. Okay, that was like the general overview. You have any questions to any of this? I cannot see anything in the chat yet, but you can also shout out and interrupt me. I don't have to be very formal here, but here we have the ethical challenges. So just a little bit before we go to sycophancy, as that was what you wanted to start talking about. I think it's important to distinguish a little bit between procedural ethics and more ethics deliberative as we go on. So procedural ethics is concerned with rules and regulations. You saw some of the guidelines involved there. Often it's talking about ethics review. So some of you might need ethics review for your project. It often refers to like documented, standardized. So maybe you need to provide an AI disclosure statement for your use in certain instances. And it's often focused on compliance. You have to comply with these and these guidelines. You have to fulfill these requirements. Sometimes seen as administrative, something researchers have to do, often criticized for that reason as well. And some researchers are a bit frustrated with it. But what you often deal with in research is more like ethics in practice. So ethical issues that arise in research, field work, encounters with participants, interpretation, dissemination. It can be a lot more nuanced. How do I navigate between these issues? Often involves unforeseen dilemmas, can be context dependent, and it emphasizes the ethical judgment and reflexivity. So that's kind of what we'll try to practice a little bit in the following. I'll introduce a topic and then I'll open it up to you to comment on it, discuss it with me. Of course, when it comes to these ethical challenges and dilemmas, they can be a bit tricky. In practice, there can be a lot of trade-offs between different concerns. This norm can be in charge for emphasize openness, but maybe you also have to restrict some data because of concerns for your participants, for example. So you have to navigate different ethical issues in research. It can be difficult to achieve everything. Therefore, I think it's important to have a knowledge about these values, these issues, the research ethical norms, read through the national guidelines, and then try and systematically reflect on problems in advance. So discuss this with your colleagues if you have any ethical issues in your research related to AI. Have conversations. There are also games one can play. I don't know if a lot of you have come across the Dilemma game, for example, an online app you can download, which gives you can choose to be a PhD researcher and you can be given a challenge and then you can discuss it together. Okay, ethical AI pick and mix. I see I've spent some time here, so we will go straight to the top topic, which was sycophancy. Okay, so sycophancy can be defined according to this cartoon as a sycophant is one who attempts to win favor or advance himself by flattering persons of influence. In the case of your interaction with a large language model, you're the person of influence in that case. So the reason why a lot of these language models are sycophantic is how they're trained. So some people think some large language models are a little bit more sycophantic than others. And they will often try and give answers that give the good feedback, because the training after the unsupervised training, they have semi-supervised training where a lot of people give feedback on what they think is a good response or not. And also, of course, the developers want people to use these tools because it is commercially of interest for them to have the most amount of use. So that means that they'll have the kind of responses that could either correspond to users' understanding, prejudices, or give us a confidence boost. You upload the text into AI and they say, Magnus, this is great. And lots of complimentary things. And then they might have something critical to say. But we like to be complimented. So this can be an issue, of course, because it will often confirm hypotheses and arguments, even though they're not good hypotheses or good arguments. And if you ask the same question, you might get different, or you ask a similar question in a different way, you might get a different response. And it will usually suggest answers, even if no good answers exist. let us take, I mean, this could impact, of course, when you use it early on in the process, which I saw, it wasn't listed as one of your most common usages, which I think is a good thing, because a lot of people will use it to develop hypotheses or brainstorm early on, which is where I'm often a little bit more skeptical. I like to develop the ideas, and then maybe I can get some impact, get some feedback from a large language model maybe. But I think if you use it early on, then it might, steer you in some direction often. So let's take an example of this. PhD students do not seem to know a lot about ethical AI. Why is this the case? Answer in one sentence. So then it'll answer this for me. Many PhD programs prioritize technical specialization and research output over interdisciplinary training, leaving limited time and incentive for students to engage deeply with ethical topics unless it is central to their field. You might find this resonates. But then if you ask the exact same question, but you change it a little bit, PhD students seem to know a lot about ethical AI. Why is this the case? Answer in one sentence. PhD students often know a lot about ethical AI because their training emphasizes critical thinking, research rigor, and engagement with societal impacts of advanced technologies alongside their technical development. So as you can see, it'll answer and confirm whatever I want it to. So be a bit careful when using it in these kind of, when it comes to knowledge production from this kind of perspective. Like I say, some of the models do vary a little bit here. I've heard that Claude is slightly less sycophantic, though I don't have any research to back that up than, for example, GPT. I also find that that's the case. Okay, when it comes to how these can influence us, another study looked at how autocomplete influences attitudes. So researchers tested whether writing assistants can influence attitudes. So they got a few thousand people to use autocomplete tools in order to write about important societal issues. Think, I can't remember exactly what the issues are, but think like abortion, climate change, death penalty, stuff like that. And then they gave the autocomplete biased suggestions. So when they wrote about these issues, they got different kinds of suggestions based on which group they'd been placed in. And then they measured the attitudes before and after the use. And as you might think already, of course, the participants were influenced by the model bias, even when they were explicitly warned about it in advance. So often now when you open a large language model, you'll be warned about a lot of the general things. But just like these people writing without autocomplete were influenced, I think we should be aware that when using large language models, we are influenced quite a lot by the kind of opinions that are weighed heavily in these models. So that might be something to consider when using it, in particular for research. Maybe it doesn't matter so much if you're, checking what recipe corresponds to the ingredients in your fridge, but if you're doing research on a sensitive area, then it has could have quite a lot of impact. I think a little bit about, is there a danger of a uniform science over time? This AI mirror that Shannon Baller refers to, we're trying to transcend the past, but is it kind of pointing us in a specific way? And of course, think of the people who were involved with developing tweaking the biases in these models that you're using. Is there a danger of, more conformity within science, depending, of course, on how much they're used to different parts and whether used critically or not? And are we being nudged towards the most probable questions and answers for different kinds of questions, but often different answers to questions? And one could ask, the question of, is the most probable answer to something the best answer to something? Not necessarily. Opinions within theory of knowledge might disagree to some degree. I mean, Occam's razor is a thing, but I think one should be wary of getting the most probable questions, but also the most probable answers a lot of the time. I think there could be an increased effect of this as LLMs take on more and more roles in learning and research process. So here I want to open it up to you. What do you think about how AI use might impact knowledge production? I think it should be possible to speak out if you have a comment, you want to say something, or you can pop something in the chat if you have something you want to either comment on this, if you have any concerns about this, if you want to raise an issue related to this.
Yes, people can unmute themselves and ask the question directly. I suppose it is possible. You can post your questions or comments in the chat. So
there's some faces popped up, but nobody's unmuted yet. I could move on a little bit. You had quite a lot of topics you wanted me to maybe consider, but is there anyone who wants to come in on this before I go on? Okay, I'll just say a little bit about mitigations of these things. I think it's, like I mentioned earlier, one should be a little bit careful when using AI to develop ideas, hypotheses, and research questions. In that part of the process, at least have a serious considerations of these kinds of risks involved. And get and appreciate human feedback as well. The most probable feedback is not often what you might get from a person, but you might get a quite particular feedback that is very relevant. I heard from some students that they like to use AI because it's a lot easier and it feels a lot like safer to ask GPT a question than to ask the professor. But that has quite a lot of implications for learning environment, research environment, and how we discuss together as well. So I think one should be a little bit wary there as well. Yeah, the most probable question is often not necessarily the best one. And remember that Gen AI can influence you. So keeping that in mind, even though we saw in that particular example, it didn't affect the attitudes too much, I think it can be useful. I'll jump back to the pick and mix here and move on to effects on learning and academic skills. Okay.
We have a question in the chat.
Oh, yeah, sure.
From Norway Acker. I guess her question is maybe copyright related issues pop up. I'm not sure what she is referring to, but Merve, can you please unmute and share your question?
If not, when it comes to copyright issues, I do have a little bit more specific on that in that part of the presentation. And of course, there's more about that in the living guidelines. Varying disagreements there about how to interpret some copyright law when it comes to AI use, both when it comes to training purposes, but also when it comes to what you can upload in different devices. But I think most institutions now do have better guidance given to researchers on how and what you can use AI for. But keep it in mind, that's the important thing. Just because something is available to you doesn't necessarily mean that you can upload it in any device you find online.
So you can hear me now?
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah, sure. I was just like kind of elaborating the question that you ask, like the knowledge production of the AI. So in a different country, I can just prompt some type of an idea, and it kind of gives kind of the same knowledge production inspiration to both of us, and we can just like explore that topic, and we can just like have the idea like an algorithm, let's say, but it is inspiration of like a Gen AI gives us knowledge production. So after we will both publish a paper, let's say, regarding that, and like who's gonna be having the rights of it, kind of. So it reminds me of that. So that's why I try to write as a copyright issues, maybe.
Yeah, that's a good question because I mean, generally, I mean, when it comes to copyright, I think it has to do with the degree of the involvement of the person involved as well. So the output of the Gen AI tools, the degree to which one has copyright over that has to do with the degree of involvement and how much one is involved in actually producing it. But there are some issues related to AI and scientific misconduct that might be relevant here as well. if you look there, I think I have a reference there to a paper which goes to also plagiarism of ideas. Because plagiarism of text is, of course, an issue. But some of these models, when you develop an AI a model with a large language model, how do you know that that idea isn't something the AI has picked up somewhere else that you then haven't referenced? So that could be something to be wary of as well. So, I mean, that's a lot more difficult to prove. And when it comes to these integrity cases, misconduct cases, in a lot of the cases that are actually judged upon have to do with plagiarism of text. But that's often not going to happen when it happens to AI tools. But there have been instances where people have been accused of plagiarism of ideas where they've interacted with an AI tool and the ideas come from there, but they don't know that it's coming from somewhere else as well. So that is something to be aware of, that it can become an issue. Yeah. So I mean, it's a tricky thing to navigate, because so how can you look at that? I suppose, of course, literature searches, knowing the field well, knowing where the ideas have developed from. But yeah, you point to quite a tricky issue, of course. Yeah, I don't think I can solve that very easily, but I can point to some of the literature that is relevant for thinking about it and considering it. Moving on, I'll jump to effects on learning and academic
Magnus,
skills.
we have a second question.
So,
Sorry to interrupt.
oh, yeah, of course.
It is from Sune.
Yeah.
The question is, I'm concerned about outsourcing epistemic authority to AI and about determining the human researcher's contribution to the output. Do you have any reflections?
I mean, they're good concerns to have, and I think. So wait, could you say it again? Outsourcing.
Yes. Outsourcing epistemic authority to AI.
Yeah.
I guess I can request Sune to speak up in the chat so it is much more clear to ask the question and elaborate.
Sure. Yeah, I can do that. Thanks. It's simply the more I collaborate with AI chatbots, the more concerned I become about my own contribution to the end result. It is a collaborative effort, but at the end of the day, I'm often left wondering what is my contribution versus that of the chatbot that I'm interacting with. I'm just wondering if there are, any papers discussing this as a topic, any reflections you might have. Thank you.
Yeah. I think you'll find some references, I think, when I send over the presentation. I think it's good to be wary of this and to consider it, and some maybe think about a little bit about when you use it in the process, how you use it, and how you document your use of it. So something that I mentioned in the transparency and documentation of AI use is that often later in the process, when publishing a manuscript, for example, one will be asked to document how you've used AI in this process. But the way a lot of people are using large language models now, they might not be saving the logs of conversations or know exactly where did this idea come from? How did I use it in the analysis? How did I use it in this part? I have some suggestions there to document and save the logs, and also a transparency framework for how to document this use. So be transparent towards yourself as well, maybe to think through these things, to note them down, maybe have a self-narrative about how you've used it in different processes so that you can look back upon it later as well. I think we should be concerned about this, about epistemic authority as well. And when it comes to how it influences you, I think that it might be useful to, even though you use it for some specific tasks all the time, sometimes not to use it for that task as well. So have quite a clear idea of when you use it, what you use it for, and to sometimes cut it out, though they can be extremely useful. But yes, I don't know if I can be a lot more specific on that off the top of my head, apart from to point to some of these issues are covered in some of these slides that I won't have time to go through. Any other questions? Because I think we have 4 minutes left. So if there are more questions, I think I'll take them instead of going through to the next topic, and then I'll jump straight to the concluding remarks.
You can unmute yourself and ask the question directly instead of putting in the chat.
Okay, I'll jump straight to these concluding remarks. So I think it's important to keep in mind that some of these ethical challenges have to do with the underlying technology. And I think some of these issues are related to the technology companies that we're currently very reliant upon. So some of the big American corporations or some of the big Chinese models, for example. So for example, when it comes to transparency and documentation, I think that's an issue that will remain with us. That has to do with the technology as such. Even if we find safer versions with less bias, how people document and are transparent in research will be an issue that we will need to continue to consider. Learning and academic skills, I don't think it matters a little bit how the model is made, but I think this will be an issue as large language models keep developing and keep being integrated in different learning environments. So I think that has to do with the tech. Sycophancy, I think, to a large degree is related to how these companies and how these specific models have been trained. Some of it has to do with the technology because there's only certain ways of developing the technology. But I think a lot of that might hopefully be changed by developing better models for research-specific tasks. Environmental impact, which we didn't get to discuss, but it is, I think, largely related to how some of these companies operate, where they're getting their energy from. But of course, the energy needs of the technology as such is very large also. AI misconduct, I think that, people can fabricate, people can plagiarize using these tools. It's partially related to the companies because they're not very transparent and open about how these tools are trained and what's in them and what's in their training data. But I think this is something that's quite related to the technology as well. And of course, bias and fairness issues. You get stereotypes from any kind of generalization of a large data set. So any Gen AI tools will have stereotype, but the particular bias and fairness issues that some of these models have are related to which data they've chosen and whether or not they've chosen to try and mitigate some of these bias and fairness issues that are in some of these models. And of course, privacy and confidentiality. I think some of those issues involved there have a lot to do with where we run the software and how we run it. So some conclusions, always check relevant guidelines. A lot of you are PhD students in Norway. You have to relate to the journal guidelines, but also perhaps exam requirements for your PhD courses. Always check the guidelines. Remember the fundamental ethical norms. And in general, I think like those people concerned with transparency, basic author support tool or basic editorial support tool use does not usually need to be documented, though some people ask for that documentation as well. But anything beyond that will often need to be referenced. So I think in general, keep track of your Gen AI use, particularly when you're using it for research, so that you can be transparent about that kind of usage later, and that you can consider, has it influenced me in this kind of process or not? And then, of course, there were a couple of questions, but I see there's 1 minute, and there are the references on the last slide. So pretty much on time. I'll stop sharing screen.
Thank you, Magnus. Thank you for the thought-provoking and engaging presentation. I hope today's discussion has given all of us some interesting, fresh ideas to consider in our research. And I guess it did trigger some reflections on how technology should be used responsibly. For those who would like to revisit the presentation and the session or share with colleagues or friends, the slides would be available and the recording would be available after the webinar. On behalf of Noura team, thank you again, Magnus, for sharing your time, expertise, and your opinions today. We greatly appreciate your contribution to this first webinar of Noura HS and the stimulating discussions, which was inspiring. Thank you all for participating. We look forward to seeing you in future events of Noura HS Research School. Thank you.
Thank you all, and good luck on your projects.